Imagine a world where every single sunrise wasn't just a natural event, but a hard-won victory of light over darkness. In the golden sands of ancient Egypt, life was governed by a single, beautiful concept. It was the rhythm of the stars, the predictable flooding of the Nile, and the very breath of justice. For thousands of years, the Egyptians believed that as long as they honored the gods, the universe would remain in perfect balance. It was a time of absolute certainty, where the divine and the human world walked hand in hand through the sacred temple halls. But history has a way of hiding its darkest chapters between the lines of official records. Near the end of the 19th dynasty, a subtle, chilling shift began to ripple through the air of Thebes. It wasn't a physical storm you could see on the horizon, but a spiritual decay known as Isfet, the ancient term for chaos and entropy. Think of it like a glitch in the cosmic software. To understand how high the stakes were, we have to travel far from the Nile, deep into the western desert, to the oasis of Siwa. This wasn't just a patch of greenery. It was the home of the most powerful oracle in the known world. Even Alexander the Great would eventually trek here to seek the truth. The Oracle of Amun was the direct telephone line to the king of the gods. For centuries, the priests there provided answers to kings and peasants alike, interpreting the rustle of palm leaves and the swaying of the gods' golden bark during the grand processions. However, on one particular night, the impossible happened. As the moon rose over the dunes, a group of priests entered the inner sanctum to perform the evening rituals. They expected the usual divine hum, that comforting presence of the Creator. Instead, they were met with a wall of absolute, terrifying silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was as if the god had walked out of the room and slammed the door. The sacred atmosphere that had pulsed with energy for generations simply vanished, leaving behind a cold, hollow vacuum that made their skin crawl. The physical signs of this divine abandonment were even more disturbing. The eternal flames in the bronze braziers, which were never supposed to go out, suddenly flickered and turned a deep, sickly shade of obsidian black. The water of vision, a sacred pool used for scrying the future, became as thick and opaque as tar. The priests, men who had spent their entire lives studying the nuances of the divine, found themselves gasping for air. In the Egyptian mind, if the oracle was silent, it meant that the sun might not rise the next day. This wasn't just a local problem in Siwa, it was a cosmic emergency. You see, the Egyptians believed that their rituals literally kept the world spinning. Without the guidance of Amun, the great serpent of chaos, Apep could finally win his eternal battle and swallow the sun. The silence was a signal that the protective barrier around Egypt was failing. The high priests realized that the gods weren't just angry. They were afraid. Something was coming that bypassed their laws. Something so ancient and foreign that even the king of the gods had no words left to speak. As the news of the great silence spread through the whispers of the temple corridors, a sense of dread took hold of the elite. They began to search the ancient scrolls, looking for any mention of a time when the gods went mute. They were looking for an enemy, a war, or perhaps a plague. But what they found was much more mysterious. They found references to a void in the stars, a moment when the destiny of the world would be handed over to someone who didn't exist in the records of the living or the halls of the dead. The high priests fell to their knees, their shaven heads touching the cold stone, realizing that when the king of the gods stops talking, the universe is about to scream. They tried everything: sacrifices, secret chants, and pouring libations. But the silence only grew heavier, pressing against their chests, like the weight of a pyramid. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't an ending, but a terrifying beginning. This silence wasn't a void. It was the held breath of the universe, hiding a child whose very existence was a secret the stars were trying to keep from the gods themselves. While the rest of Egypt slept in a state of uneasy peace, the intellectual heart of the empire was racing. If the king of the gods, Amun, had gone silent, the priests knew there was only one deity left who could translate the static of the universe. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, magic, and writing. They traveled to Hermopolis, the city of the Eight, where the great library of Thoth was said to contain every word ever spoken since the beginning of time. It was a place where history wasn't just recorded, it was anchored into reality through the power of sacred hieroglyphs. Deep beneath the main altar, in a chamber that hadn't been opened since the days of the Old Kingdom. A group of master scribes discovered something that shouldn't have existed. It was a wall covered in living ink hieroglyphs that seemed to shimmer and shift when not looked at directly. This wasn't a standard record of grain taxes or royal lineages. It was a forbidden inscription, a piece of cosmic code hidden by Thoth himself. The scribes realized they were looking at a prophecy that predated the pyramids. A warning about a child without a name who would be born when the gods lost their voices. To understand the gravity of this, you have to realize that for the Egyptians, names were everything. A name was your soul's ID card. To be without a name meant you didn't belong to the social or divine order. According to the inscription, this child's thread wasn't being spun by Neith, the terrifyingly wise goddess who wove the tapestry of all human fates. Usually, every life was a pre-planned pattern on her loom, but this child was different. Their origin wasn't from the organized world of the gods, but from the terrifying, watery abyss of Nun, the primordial chaos that existed before the universe began. This was the ultimate system error. If the child wasn't part of Neith's tapestry, the gods had no control over their destiny. The inscription described the child as a breaker of seals, someone whose very footsteps would crack the foundations of the temples. As the lead priest wiped away the dust of centuries, his heart sank. The text didn't speak of a savior who would bring peace and golden harvests. Instead, it whispered of a necessary ruin. It suggested that the current world had grown stagnant and corrupt, and only a child born of the abyss could burn it all down to allow a new world to grow. The more the scribes read, the more they realized why this information had been buried. The prophecy claimed that the child would possess a ka, a soul that acted like a magnet for the ancient shadows, while the gods sat on their golden thrones in Heliop. This child would be a bridge to the things that lived in the dark, the creatures and forces that had been locked away since the dawn of time. The inscription ended with a terrifying visual, a child standing between a dying sun and a rising serpent, holding the heart of the world in hands that were not yet strong enough to carry it. The atmosphere in the subterranean chamber grew cold as the realization set in. They weren't just looking for a person. They were looking for a ticking time bomb. The silence of Siwa finally made sense. The gods weren't just being quiet. They were hiding in fear of what this child represented. If the prophecy was true, the laws of Mat were about to be rewritten by a mortal infant. The scribes knew they had to find the mother before the agents of chaos did. But the ink on the wall began to bleed, obscuring the location of the birth and leaving only a cryptic set of coordinates. As they hurried to exit the collapsing chamber, one young scribe noticed a final line of text that the others had missed. It stated that the child's birth would be signaled not by a message in the temples, but by a scar in the sky. The heavens themselves were about to record the arrival of the Nameless One. The race was no longer just about information. It was about survival. They had to look up, beyond the clouds, to find the exact moment when the old world ended and the new one began, because the stars were already starting to move into a formation that had not been seen in 10,000 years. But as the priests scanned the horizons for a sign, they were looking at the wrong part of the sky. They expected a golden light, but what was actually coming was a star that bled crimson, marking the exact house where a woman was about to go into labor, a birth that would attract something far more dangerous than a group of priests. The air along the banks of the Nile usually carried the scent of wet silt and blooming lotus, but on this night, the atmosphere felt charged with static, like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. While the priests in their distant temples scrambled over dusty scrolls, the true epic was unfolding in a nameless village of mud brick huts and swaying palms. Here, far from the golden opulence of the pharaoh's court, a woman named Merit was enduring a labor that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. She wasn't a queen or a priestess. She was a commoner, yet her struggle was currently the most important event in the cosmos. To the ancient Egyptians, the stars were not just distant lights. They were the followers of Thoth, a map of the divine will. The most sacred of all was Sothis, known to us as Sirius. Usually, its appearance heralded the rising of the Nile and the birth of a new year, a symbol of hope and renewal. But as Merit's cries echoed through the village, Sothis did something that defied every astronomical record in history. The brilliant white-blue star began to pulse with a violent, bleeding crimson hue. It looked like a wound in the velvet fabric of the night sky, a celestial warning that the natural order had been set on fire. This crimson Sothis was a sign the forbidden inscription had predicted the scar in the sky. Inside the humble hut, the village midwives whispered prayers to Hathor, the goddess of motherhood, but their voices trembled. They could feel that this birth was different. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and dance with a life of their own, and the candles flickered with a strange, rhythmic heartbeat. Merit's labor wasn't just a physical process. It was a battle. She felt as though she were holding back a floodgate, her body acting as the final barrier between the world she knew and a power that belonged to the primordial void. As the labor reached its peak, a strange phenomenon occurred outside in the surrounding dunes. The great sand sea, which usually remains still under the moonlight, began to churn like a boiling cauldron. It wasn't a windstorm. The movement came from deep beneath the surface. Something ancient, something that had been buried since before the first stone of Memphis was laid, was reacting to the child's arrival. The desert was sensing the birth of a soul that shared its chaotic nature, and it was preparing to welcome its kin with a hunger that had been suppressed for millennia. The connection between the mother and the child was becoming a bridge for this surging energy. Merit saw visions of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and heard the whispers of gods who were supposed to be silent. She saw the crying of the sky, a moment where the stars wept for the loss of their predictability. Despite the agony, she gripped her protective amulets with a ferocity that surprised the midwives. She knew, with a mother's instinct, that her child was being born into a world that would either worship him as a god or hunt him as a demon, and she was determined to be his first and only shield. At the exact moment of the child's first cry, the crimson light of Sothis reached its maximum intensity, illuminating the entire Nile Valley in a ghostly, blood-red glow. In that heartbeat, the silence of Siwa was finally broken, not by the voice of Amun-Ra, but by the piercing scream of a newborn. It was a sound that carried the weight of the abyss, a frequency that resonated through the stones of every pyramid and the depths of every tomb. The child was here, and the K, the life force he brought into the world, was so dense that it physically rattled the offerings on the village altars. But the celebration was short-lived. Outside the hut, the midwives froze in terror. The churning sands of the desert had stopped moving, but not because the energy had dissipated. Instead, a massive, jagged rift had opened in the dunes just a few hundred yards away. A low, guttural vibration began to emanate from the crack, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. It wasn't the sound of a god, but of a scavenger. The birth had been a beacon, and the darkness that lived in the Red Land had finally found its target. The stars had tried to hide the child, but the earth had betrayed him. The high priests in Heliopolis, watching the sky from their observatories, dropped their instruments in horror. They saw the red star and knew the clock had started. They weren't just looking at a birth. They were looking at the beginning of an eclipse that could last forever. The child of the prophecy was no longer a myth written on a forbidden wall. He was a living, breathing reality wrapped in the arms of a terrified mother in a village that was about to become the center of a supernatural war zone. Far beneath the dunes, in the lightless pits of the desert, something that had been dead for 5,000 years opened its eyes. The cry of the newborn didn't just attract the blessing of the stars. It acted as a key, turning in the lock of a prison that was never meant to be opened. To truly grasp the magnitude of the threat looming over the newborn, we must first confront the ultimate nightmare of the Egyptian soul, Apep. In our modern stories, villains usually have motives or backstories. But in the ancient Nile, Apep was something far more terrifying. He was the embodiment of Isfet, not just evil, but total non-existence. He wasn't a creature that wanted to rule the world. He was the cosmic vacuum that wanted to unmake it. To the Egyptians, he was a serpent of the abyss, the eternal enemy of light, who'd been waiting since the first sunrise to return the universe to a state of cold, silent nothingness. Every night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Egyptians believed a literal war for reality began. Ra, the sun god, would descend into the Duat in his solar bark, and there, the great serpent would be waiting. Apep's gaze was said to be hypnotic, a paralysis of the soul that could freeze even the bravest gods in their tracks. This was a cycle of eternal recurrence, a daily battle to ensure that tomorrow would actually happen. But the birth of the child of prophecy acted like a massive flare in the darkness, alerting Apep that a new player had entered the game, one whose soul didn't follow the old rules of the gods. In the hierarchy of cosmic threats, the child was now the ultimate prize. You see, the gods operated within the boundaries of Mat, the divine order, which meant they were predictable, but the child of the abyss was a wild card. The prophecy suggested that this child's sly force was the only thing capable of acting as a living seal against the serpent. If the child were to fall into the shadows, Apep wouldn't just win a battle, he would devour the very concept of the future. The serpent didn't just want to kill the baby, he wanted to fuse with it, using its unique essence to bypass the defenses of the celestial realms. As the child took its first breaths in that humble hut, the physical world began to bleed. We aren't talking about metaphor here. In the village, the milk in the jars turned sour instantly, and the shadows on the ground began to move independently of the objects casting them. This was the shadow of Apep creeping across the threshold of the material world. It was a cold, suffocating presence that made the air feel thin and brittle. The villagers didn't know about cosmic serpents, but they felt a primal, genetic terror. The kind of fear that makes a bird fall silent when a hawk circles above the nest. The priests of the House of Life in distant Memphis felt it too. They observed the Nile's waters turning a sickly, stagnant gray near the banks. This was the corruption of Isfet spreading. They realized that the silence of Siwa wasn't just a lack of communication, it was a tactical retreat. The gods were pulling their energy back to defend the gates of heaven, leaving the mortal world and this child dangerously exposed. The serpent was no longer confined to the underworld. His influence was leaking through the cracks in the sky, turning the land of the living into a dark hunting ground. Wait, it gets even more intense. In Egyptian mythology, Apep's greatest weapon was his voice, a low, rhythmic vibration that could cause the mountains to crumble and the heart to stop beating. As the shadow deepened over the village, a low hum began to vibrate through the very floor of Merit's hut. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, but with your bones. It was the sound of the abyss calling its own. The child, instead of crying, suddenly fell into a deep, unutteral trance. His eyes, once bright with the newness of life, became as dark and reflective as the obsidian pools in the temples. This confrontation wasn't just about a monster and a hero. It was about the architecture of existence. If the child survived, the world would have a chance to evolve past the rigid control of the old gods. If the serpent won, the tapestry of history would be unraveled, thread by thread, until the very memory of humanity was erased. The shadow of Apep was now a physical entity, a massive shifting, oily darkness that began to coil around the village, isolating it from the rest of Egypt. The light of the red star was being choked out, and for the first time, the sun's return was no longer guaranteed. The village was now a bubble of reality under siege by the infinite void. Merit held her son closer, feeling the unnatural cold radiating from his small body, realizing that the blessing of the gods was actually a death sentence. But just as the first tendril of pure darkness touched the door of the hut, a golden flash erupted from the sand. A figure, neither fully human nor fully divine, emerged from the rift we saw earlier. It wasn't the serpent, but something just as ancient, and it wasn't there to serve the gods. The battle for the child's soul had officially begun, but the savior who appeared wasn't the one the priests had prayed for. In fact, this protector was someone the gods had spent the last 3,000 years trying to forget, and he had a very different plan for the child of the prophecy. The darkness of the village was thick enough to touch, but as the shadow of Apep reached for the child, the desert itself seemed to intervene. To understand our next player, you have to forget the weathered stone statue you see in modern photos of Giza. We are talking about the living Sphinx, the Hormakat Horus in the horizon. In ancient lore, the Sphinx wasn't just a monument, it was a cosmic gatekeeper, a creature of high intelligence and terrifying physical power that stood at the intersection of the human world and the divine realm. As Merit fled into the dunes with her baby pressed against her chest, the sand beneath her feet shifted, rising like a tidal wave. From the golden dust emerged a figure that defied logic. A colossal being with the muscular body of a lion and the piercing, wise face of a pharaoh, eyes glowing with the blue light of a dying star. This was the Forgotten Guardian, an ancient version of the Sphinx that had existed before the First Dynasty. It didn't serve the gods of the current temple. It served the primordial law of the earth itself, acting as a filter for those who dared to cross into the sacred. The encounter was not a battle of claws, but a battle of wills. The Sphinx lowered its massive head, its breath smelling of ancient incense and sun-baked stone. In a voice that sounded like grinding tectonic plates, it didn't ask a simple riddle. but a question of the soul. Do you carry a savior, or the architect of the end? Merit, a simple woman facing a titan, stood her ground. This moment is crucial in our story because it represents the first time a mortal challenged the inevitable destiny laid out by the gods and the chaos serpent alike. This creature, the Sphinx, represents the perfect synthesis of human wisdom and animal instinct. To the Egyptians, it was the lord of terror and silence. It knew that the child was a biological anomaly, breaker of seals. As it looked into the infant's obsidian eyes, the Sphinx saw something that made its stone flesh tremble. It saw that the child wasn't just a victim of a prophecy. He was the master of it. The Guardian realized that its ancient oath to protect Egypt now required it to protect the very thing the gods wanted to destroy. The dialogue between the Sphinx and the mother was philosophical and heavy with the weight of ages. The Sphinx revealed that the child's soul was not a single thread, but a knot where old timelines met. The gods fear him, the Guardian whispered, because he is the only being who can look at the sun and the serpent and see them as equals. This is where the story takes a sharp turn into political intrigue. The Sphinx wasn't just a protector, it was a mentor, warning that the child's greatest danger wouldn't be the monsters in the dark, but the righteous light of the heavens. As the shadow of Apep circled the perimeter of the Sphinx's aura, unable to penetrate its ancient protection, the Guardian made a choice. It would guide the mother and child, but not to a palace or a temple. It would lead them toward the only place where the gods could not see, and where the serpent could not follow. The cracks between the hours. The Sphinx provided a mental map, a series of vibrations and memories that would allow them to navigate the impossible geography of the underworld while still being physically alive. The tension in this scene is palpable. You have a mother, a baby, and a mountain of a creature standing against an encroaching cosmic void. The Sphinx warned Merit that by taking its help, she was stepping off the map of history. From this moment on, they were ghosts in their own land. The royal blood mentioned in the ancient scrolls began to pulse in the child's veins, reacting to the Sphinx's proximity. It was becoming clear that the child was not just a commoner. He was an heir to a throne that existed before the world was even formed. With a final, earth-shaking roar, the Sphinx pushed back the shadows of Apep, creating a temporary tunnel of light through the desert. It told Merit that her destination was the Duat, the realm of the dead. It sounds insane taking a living baby into the land of the deceased, but it was the only way to hide his ka from the prying eyes of the Celestial Council. The Sphinx's role as the forgotten guardian was fulfilled, but its parting words left a chilling echo in the air about the true nature of the child's lineage. The Sphinx watched them disappear into the shimmering haze of the desert, its eyes dimming back to cold stone. It had saved them from the serpent, but it knew a secret that it couldn't bring itself to say. The royal blood in the child's veins did not come from any pharaoh of Egypt, but from a source so ancient that even the gods would tremble if they knew its name. And to find the truth, the child would have to face the one place where truth is weighed against a feather. Now, you might be thinking, taking a newborn baby into the land of the dead sounds like the world's worst parenting decision. But in the logic of Egyptian myth, the Duat wasn't just a place for the deceased. It was a parallel dimension of pure energy, to hide the child from the prying eyes of the gods in the sky and the serpent in the sand. The Sphinx led Merit to a hidden fissure in the reality of the desert. As they stepped through, the golden heat of the sun was instantly replaced by a cold, indigo mist. They had entered the 12 chambers of the night, a subterranean cosmos where every hour is a different nightmare. Imagine a place where the sky is made of iron and the rivers flow with liquid fire. This is the Duat. For a mortal like Merit, every step was a battle against the second death, the total erasure of the soul. It traveled along the banks of the river of the abyss, passing through gates guarded by entities that looked like fever dreams. Creatures with human bodies and the heads of knives, or serpents that breathed fire. These were the gatekeepers of the hours, and usually, they only allowed those with the correct magic spells to pass. But as Merit approached, the gates didn't just open. They seemed to groan and bow, sensing the presence of the nameless child. The sheer visual scale of this place is something modern cinema can barely capture. We are talking about forests of upside-down trees and lakes of boiling turquoise, where the damned are purified. For a child to be here, breathing the air of the afterlife, was a massive violation of cosmic law. Merit could see the bird-like souls of the recently departed fluttering in the shadows, their eyes wide with shock. This was a documentary of the impossible, a living pulse in the heart of the eternal stillness. The further they went, the more the child's skin began to glow with a soft, bioluminescent light, as if he were absorbing the very essence of the underworld. As they reached the 7th hour, the deepest point of the night, they came across the mirror of Hathor. In Egyptian lore, Hathor wasn't just the goddess of love. She was the lady of the mirror, a deity who could show you your true reflection, stripped of all lies and titles. This wasn't a piece of polished silver. It was a massive, vertical pool of liquid starlight. The Sphinx had warned Merit that to pass this point, she had to look into the mirror. It was the ultimate psychological test. If your heart was heavy with guilt, the mirror would swallow you whole. But if you were pure, it would reveal the blueprint of your destiny. Merit stepped forward, trembling, and held the child up to the shimmering surface. She expected to see a savior, a golden king, who would bring Maat, or divine order, back to the world. She expected to see the face of a hero. Instead, the liquid starlight turned a deep, bruised purple. The reflection didn't show a king. It showed a figure of shifting shadows, a being whose very presence caused the stars in the mirror to blink out one by one. The child's reflection wasn't fighting the darkness, it was commanding it. The mirror didn't reflect the protector of the gods, it reflected their replacement. This was the moment of unmaking. Merit realized, with a jolt of pure terror, that the Criança da Profecia wasn't a tool for the gods to use against Apep. He was something entirely outside the system. Into Mira's depths, she saw visions of the great temples of Karnak and Luxor crumbling into dust. Not because of evil, but because their time had simply ended. The child was a universal reset button. To the gods of Heliopolis, this child wasn't a miracle. He was a virus in the cosmic code. He didn't come to save their world. He came to start a new one, and that made him the most hunted being in all of existence. Despite the revelation, Merit's love didn't waver. She understood now that she wasn't just protecting her son. She was protecting the right of the world to change, to grow, and to even die so it could be reborn. The Duat itself seemed to react to her resolve. The indigo mist began to swirl into a vortex, pulling them toward the final chambers. They were no longer just travelers. They were fugitives of the divine order. The gods had finally located them, above, in the world of the living. The statues of the gods in the temples began to weep blood, signaling that the great search had begun. The air in the Duat grew heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient judgment. They were approaching the Hall of Truth, where the gods would try to reclaim what they feared. Merit knew that her journey through the shadows was almost over, but the real trial was just beginning. The child in her arms shifted, his eyes opening to reveal a gaze that was far too old for a newborn. He wasn't afraid of the dark. He was the reason the dark was afraid. But as they stepped toward the final gate, a shadow colder than anything in the Duat blocked their path. It wasn't a monster or a guardian, but a god, with the head of a jackal, holding a scale that had never been wrong. Anubis was waiting, and he didn't want their names. He wanted the child's heart. And in the Duat, you don't argue with the Lord of the Scale. You either weigh your soul, or you lose it forever. In the center of this terrifyingly beautiful hall stands the most famous object in mythology, the Scales of Justice. Usually, this is where the jackal-headed god Anubis takes a person's heart and weighs it against the feather of Ma. If the heart is lighter than the feather, you live forever. If it's heavier, you're lunch for Amun, the devourer of souls. But as Merit stepped into the light, Anubis didn't reach for a human heart. He looked at the child, and his eyes, the color of burning amber, widened. He realized that the child's ka, or soul, wasn't made of flesh and memories. It was a crystal heart, a concentrated diamond of pure cosmic potential. This wasn't a standard trial. Anubis, the lord of the sacred land, found himself in a position that even he, the keeper of all secrets, hadn't prepared for. He was an auditor of the past, but the child in Merit's arms was the architect of the future. The law of the Duat states that nothing living can bypass the scale. Yet the child's vibration was so intense that the heavy gold of the balance began to hum. Anubis didn't ask for a confession of sins. He reached out with long, clawed fingers and touched the infant's chest. And instead of a heartbeat, the hall filled with the sound of 1,000 ringing bells. The tension in the room was suffocating. Merit stood frozen as Anubis placed the crystal heart, the energetic essence of the baby, on one side of the scale. But instead of the feather of Maat on the other side, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Thoth, the god of wisdom, holding a single drop of eternal time. This was the test. Could one child's soul carry the weight of all the ages to come? This was no longer about whether the child was good or bad. It was about whether his existence would tip the universe into a new era, or collapse it into the abyss. What happened next defied every law of divine physics. As the crystal essence touched the plate, the scale didn't just tip, it shattered. The heavy gold crossbar snapped, and the plates hovered in midair, spinning in opposite directions. The feather of Maat, which should have been the ultimate standard, began to dissolve into white light. Thoth, the god who had recorded every event since the beginning of time, actually dropped his reed pen in shock. He looked at the readings on his divine tablet and saw a symbol that had been used since the creation of the world. The sign for the unwritten. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The judgment of the crystal heart had proved that the child was not subject to the laws of the gods. He wasn't lighter or heavier than the truth. He was a different kind of truth altogether. Anubis stepped back, bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect, or perhaps fear. He realized that by allowing this child to pass, he was essentially ending his own job. If the child survived to fulfill his destiny, the cycle of life, death, and judgment as the Egyptians knew it would be forever changed. But Dante think for a second that the other gods were going to take this line down, while Anubis and Thoth stood in awe. The great Ennead, the council of the 9 most powerful gods, was watching from the heights of Helios. They saw the scales break. They saw their own authority crumbling with it. To them, this child wasn't a miracle. He was a revolutionary. He was a threat to the very structure of the heavens. They knew they couldn't stop him in the Duat, but they had other ways to ensure that the Kriyankadia Prophecia never made it back to the world of the living. As Merit clutched her son and prepared to leave the Hall of Truth, she felt a sudden, sharp sting of betrayal in the air. The gods of light, the ones she had prayed to her whole life, were no longer her protectors, while she was focused on the monsters in the dark. She didn't realize that the most dangerous knives were being sharpened in the golden halls of the sun. The Divine Council had reached a verdict, and they had found a traitor among the mortals who was more than willing to do their dirty work. High above the clouds, in the sun-drenched city of Heliopolis, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that hadn't been felt since the dawn of time. The great Ennead, the supreme council of the 9 most powerful deities, had gathered in a palace constructed of pure quartz and solar fire. This wasn't a peaceful meeting of protectors. The pillars of the hall vibrated with the divine anxiety of beings who had ruled the cosmos for eons, and were now realizing their lease on reality was about to expire. They had watched the silence of Siwa and the shattering of the scales of Anubis, and they were terrified. In the center of the hall, the debate was fierce and unforgiving. Seth, the god of storms and desert fury, paced like a caged leopard. His voice was a thunderclap that shook the foundations of the palace. Why do we hesitate? The child is a cancer in the loom of Neith. He represents the Isfet we have fought since the first dawn. To Seth, the answer was simple obliteration, but across from him stood Isis, the queen of magic. Her eyes were filled with a complex sorrow. She understood the power of a mother's love, but even she could unignore the fact that this child's soul was a frequency that could shatter the very throne of her husband, Osiris. You see, the gods of Egypt weren't just characters. They were the personifications of the laws of nature. If the child changed those laws, the gods would cease to function. This wasn't just a trial for a baby. It was a desperate political struggle for the survival of an entire pantheon. Ra, the sun god, sat on the central throne, his radiance flickering like a dying candle. He was old, weary of the eternal war with Apep, and for the first time in eternity, he seemed to be considering the unthinkable, letting the world burn so he could finally rest. The council was divided, and in that division, a dark opportunity was born. While the gods argued in their ivory towers, the real treachery was brewing in the shadows of the mortal world. The Ennead knew they could unstrike the child directly while he was in the Duat. The laws of Anubis were too strong. They needed a mortal hand, someone who could bypass the spiritual protections and deliver a physical blow. They looked down at the high temple of Memphis and found their tool, High Priest Kameri, a man whose hunger for eternal life had made him vulnerable to the whispers of the abyss. He was the most trusted man in Egypt, and he was about to become its greatest traitor. Kameri hadn't just sold his soul to the gods. He had secretly made a pact with the shadow of Apep. The gods thought they were using him to preserve their order, but the serpent was using him to ensure the total collapse of everything. The priest was given a dagger forged from star iron, a material that could sever the connection between a body and its soul. With this weapon, he didn't need to win a war. He just needed to find a mother and her child at their most vulnerable moment. The Divine Council had inadvertently authorized a hitman for the apocalypse. The irony here is staggering and deeply human. The very gods who are supposed to protect humanity were now coordinating with a servant of chaos to murder its only hope. The treachery in Heliopolis proves that power, even divine power, will often choose its own survival over the truth. Isis tried to send a warning, a secret whisper through the wind, but Seth's storms drowned it out. The council reached their final decision. The child would not be allowed to see the next sunrise. The decree was signed in solar fire, and the high priest was unleashed like a hound into the night. As the meeting adjourned, a chilling realization settled over the celestial hall. By trying to kill the child to save themselves, the gods were inadvertently fulfilling the very prophecy they feared. They were pushing the child toward the chaos they wanted to avoid. This is the tragedy of the ancient myths. The harder you fight against destiny, the faster you run into its arms. The golden halls of Heliopolis grew strangely dim, as if the sun itself was ashamed of the contract it had just signed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would bridge the gap between heaven, earth, and the abyss. Merit and the child finally emerged from the rifts of the Duat, exhausted, and thinking they were safe under the open sky of the desert. They didn't see the figure waiting for them in the ruins of a black pyramid. They didn't see the star-iron dagger gleaming in the moonlight. But as the priest stepped forward to strike, the sky didn't just turn dark, it vanished. An eclipse of blood was beginning, and the child was no longer sleeping. He was waiting for the traitor to realize that you cannot kill what has already died in the halls of the dead. Imagine standing in the shadow of a pyramid that wasn't built for a king, but as a prison for a nightmare. This black pyramid was constructed from basalt that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. As the moon moved across the sun, the sky didn't turn gray. It turned a deep, bruised crimson, the color of an open wound. This was the signal. The high priest, Kameri, stepped out from the ruins, his eyes glowing with a sickly, borrowed light. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a vessel for the combined fear of the gods and the hunger of the great serpent. He held the star-iron dagger, a blade that didn't cut flesh, but severed the soul from the stars. Here's the crazy part. The gods in Heliopolis were actually cheering for the traitor. They were so afraid of the new era the child represented that they were willing to let a servant of chaos commit a divine assassination. Kameri approached Merit, who was exhausted, her feet bleeding from the Duat stones. She held the child tight, but the baby was no longer crying. As the eclipse reached totality, the child Eskin began to pulse with that same obsidian light we saw in the mirror of Hathor. He wasn't afraid of the dagger. He was reacting to the eclipse. To the child, the darkness wasn't an enemy, it was a battery. Suddenly, the ground beneath the pyramid cracked open. This wasn't an earthquake, it was the arrival of Apep. The great serpent of chaos didn't just appear. He bled into reality through the eclipse. His coils, miles long and made of shifting smoke and teeth, began to wrap around the Black Pyramid, using it as an antenna to broadcast his Isfet across the world. The priest, realizing he was being used by both sides, grew desperate. He raised the star-iron dagger, screaming an ancient curse intended to erase the child's name from the Book of the Living. The air around the dagger distorted, creating a vacuum that threatened to pull the very life out of Merit's lungs. But then, the impossible happened again. Merit, a simple woman with no magic, didn't cower. She placed her hand over her son's heart and whispered a name, not a name given by the gods, but a name of her own making. In doing so, she gave the nameless child a tether to the human world. This act of pure, mortal love acted like a lightning rod. The child's crystal heart erupted. Instead of a golden light, it released a wave of translucent silence, a frequency that neutralized both the priestess' curse and the serpentess' roar. It was as if the child had just hit mute on the entire apocalypse. The confrontation became a clash of three wills: the priest, the old order, the serpent, the void, and the child, the future. The star-iron dagger struck the child's chest, but instead of piercing him, the blade shattered into 1,000 shards of glass. The iron couldn't sever a soul that wasn't bound to the old laws. The recoil was devastating. Kumeri was consumed by his own borrowed power, turning into a pillar of salt and dust that the desert wind immediately scattered. The traitor of Memphis was gone, erased not by the gods, but by the very reality he tried to subvert. With the priest gone, the child turned his gaze toward the sky. He didn't use a sword or a spell. He simply existed with such intensity that the eclipse began to reverse. But here is the heavy cost. To push back Apep and save the sun, the child had to let go of his human connection. Merit felt her son's body grow cold, not with death, but with divinity. He was absorbing the chaos of the serpent and the fire of the sun simultaneously. He was becoming a living horizon, a bridge between the light and the dark. The cost of saving the world was the very humanity that Merit had tried so hard to protect. The serpent, Apep, shrieked as he was pulled back into the abyss. The black pyramid began to crumble, its basalt stones turning into harmless sand. The sun returned, but it looked different, sharper, newer, as if the lens of the world had been cleaned. Merit stood in the center of the ruins, holding a child who looked like her son, but whose eyes now contained the rotation of galaxies. The final confrontation was over. But the world that emerged from the blood eclipse was no longer the Egypt of the pharaohs. It was something else entirely. A world where the gods were no longer the masters, but the audience. The battle was won, and the sun rose over a saved nation. But as Merit looked down at her child, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. The prophecy didn't say the child would rule Egypt. It said he would transcend it. And as she looked toward the horizon, she saw the followers of Thoth descending from the sky, not to offer a crown, but to collect a debt that had been written before time began. The child had saved the world, but now the world had to figure out how to live with a god who walked among them as a stranger. This journey offers us a profound look into the Egyptian concept of eternal return. The ancients did not see time as a straight line, but as a great spinning wheel where the struggle between mad order and Isfet chaos is not a war to be won only once, but a cycle that must be maintained forever. The child of prophecy, by transcending human experience, became more than an individual life. It transformed into a symbol, a memory, a wound, a hope, and above all, a mirror. The real question this myth forces us to confront is what happens when destiny enters a world that has confused control with order. The child was not sent to deny the sacred, but to test whether institutions had transformed truth into mere ritualistic performance. It revealed the false order, the moment when structures preserve appearances while losing the real meaning beneath them. Fast-forwarding 3,000 years, we realize that the desert has a long memory. At the end of the 20th century, a team of archaeologists near the Siwa oasis discovered a hidden chamber that did not appear on any radar. Inside, they found a single pulsating piece of obsidian, a crystal heart resting on a stellar iron pedestal. It wasn't a dead object. It vibrated at a frequency that caused modern equipment to malfunction, emitting a heartbeat that corresponded to the rhythm of the stars themselves. This legacy left in the sand serves to remind us that mythology is not about the past, but a living document of the human spirit. The Egyptian oracle wasn't just predicting the end of their world. It was preparing us for the evolution of ours. As the silence of the modern world begins to mirror the silence of Siwa, the ancient prophecy awakens from its long, sandy slumber. Before history, there were legends, and they remind us that whenever something truly destined enters the world, the first thing that disturbs is not the ground beneath our feet, but the illusion that what stands today was made to last forever. The archaeologist who found the heart disappeared 3 days later, leaving behind only a notebook with a drawing of a child between a dying sun and an ascending serpent. But the most terrifying detail was the date written at the bottom of the page. The date of the next solar eclipse, an event that, coincidentally, will occur exactly 14 days from now. Are you ready for what's to come?